Welcome to 1010 Analytics. In this video, we're going to learn how to convert all of this flight data from this flight search website, like the arrival time, the price, the duration, etc., into this Excel file with about maybe 4,000 rows or so. So let's take a look at how the Excel file is structured first. So we've got 10 different airports, so from the departure airports. So flights will leave from 10 different airports and on 8 different departure dates, actually 9 different departure dates over here. And they're all arriving at one airport, which is the New York airport. So yeah, let's take a look at how all of this data was collected using Python. So first, I'll talk about how I approached this problem. So I went to the website and let's see, this is the first page that you get. And I want to look at what all price options do I have, what all time options do I have for this specific date from Atlanta to New York. So just click the search button and all these results show up. And you can see there's an arrival date, price, and there are a bunch of different rows over here of data. And I want to capture all of this data in an Excel file using Python. And I want to do this for all the different dates for this airport, and then all the different dates for the next airports, as long as I cover all the 10 different cities and the 9 different dates. And I also wanted to look at the URLs that show up after searching. So if I copy the URL over here and then the URL for another search with a different city and date, I wanted to see how similar they are, so that I just want to check if it's automated, if I can automate something over here. So as we compare them, we see that the date values here are different, and the Minneapolis is different from Atlanta, MSP different from ATL, and the rest seems to be the same apart from another date over here. So everything else looks the same though, so which means it should be okay to automate this, and we can loop through a bunch of combinations. And another thing I looked at initially was just to see how the HTML is structured behind the scenes. So what I did was I double clicked one of the arrival dates or arrival times or departure times over here. I just did a right click and inspect. And this is Google Chrome, by the way. And what this did is it took me to this HTML tag over here, which shows departure time 5:37 p.m., which is what I wanted to see. And it seems to be very well structured. As I try to scroll up, it highlights a little more. And it seems to be, yeah, if I select this specific node over here, I'll be able to get I'll get data for all of this information in this line. And then if I loop over it, I'll be able to get information for the next line and so on. Now let's move over to Python to see what all was done. So first I imported all these different libraries, and I'll go over them later as when appropriate. So the first thing I did was I created a list of dates that I wanted to look at, and this was just a bunch of strings that I wanted to show up on my Excel file at the end. So this is just the way I wanted it formatted. And usually I write functions for these, but in this case it was not necessary. I prefer demonstrating it this way because it's easier. And the same thing was done for cities. The list of all cities that I wanted to check, and the different airports and their names, the way I wanted them displayed on the Excel sheet. And then these date codes, they were derived from the URLs. So if you remember, If I open the URL over here, you see the date is formatted kind of like this. And I wanted to go through all the different dates. Like if it's December 12th to December 20, I want to make sure I have the right codes for all of them. So here are all the codes that I want to loop over. And then because there were different URLs for cities as well, so like Atlanta had a different URL for this part, then Atlanta %2C, etc. And Minneapolis had a different one. I just took their URLs and got the different ones for each city. So in this particular section, you can see there's Atlanta here, Los Angeles, Chicago, Dallas, etc. And then I moved on to the headers that I wanted my Excel file to have. I'm just quickly gonna execute these. So all the variables got stored over here at the bottom right. So you can see cities are Atlanta, Los Angeles, etc. The URLs are there too. All right. And now I wanted to create a list of all possible URLs for using all the city and date combinations that I needed. So because there were 10 different cities and 9 different dates, I'd get 90 different URLs. So if you were to do this manually, you'd have to, first of all, go to the website and query it 90 different times. And each of those 90 different times, you'd have to look at all the different rows of data and manually add them in Excel. So thankfully, we have web scraping in Python. So first what I do is I initiate an empty variable for URL. And the reason why I do this is because as I loop over all the combinations, I'm going to append everything I get into this URL variable. So this first one over here, the outer loop, is for all the cities, because if you look at the output that I got, the way it was structured, it's that for, let's say, for the first airport, which is Atlanta, I want to loop over all the different dates for Atlanta. So let's say a bunch of this is December 12th Atlanta, and then it goes December 13th Atlanta, and it's going to loop over all the different dates while keeping the airport constant. And once you're done with all the dates, then you move on to the next airport and go through the dates all over again. So that's essentially what these two loops are doing over here. The outer one is the cities and the second one's the dates. And the reason why I've written this range of cities is because I wanted it as numbers over here. So when I is 0, it would mean that it's looking through city number 0 in this list, and Python indexes using zeros instead of ones. It starts indexing from 0. So 0 essentially means the first one here, which is Atlanta. So if I is 0, it's going to look at Atlanta, and when j, which is the number of dates, or whichever date it wants to look at, let's say if the date is 2, then it's going to look at the third variable here, and then replace this URL of Atlanta with this third date of 14 over here. And then you're going to append the URL that you generate to the initial URL variable that you had created. So let's try that out. Let's see what happens. All right, so initially the URL was empty, and now you have this list of 90 different URLs. And you can see all their values here with their appropriate dates. The first one was 12/12, this is 12/13, next is 14, etc. And then the next set of loops here, we're gonna ignore for now. We'll come back to it later. Now there was so here's where I ran into a problem when I initially started testing this out. So I'm just gonna uncomment this first. Okay. So first I imported these two libraries, which are Beautiful Soup and there's URL lib2. So what Beautiful Soup does, it's just a nice way of, it allows us so much functionality of finding exactly what we want in any kind of HTML that you parse. And it just makes life easy. And URL lib2, it allows you to establish a connection from Python to a URL, and then it has inbuilt functions for getting all the HTML data and storing it to a variable in Python and then closing the connection. So you can put any kind of URL you want, and then you can just get all the HTML text behind it using this. So I followed all the exact same documentation that I was supposed to, and here's what happened. So first I'll walk through what I did. I took a sample URL. This is just the first URL in our matrix of 90 URLs. And then I called the urec, which is the URL open function. So what this did is it established a connection to the first URL that we initiated. And now that this connection is open, you can do uclient.read. Uclient is just the variable that we established over here. And you can do the read function to get all the HTML values or HTML code and then assign it to a variable within Python. So I just called it HTML over here. And now that we have all the HTML data, I then close the connection over here. And now what I did next was I used the Beautiful Soup library, and I used the HTML parser for just making life easier for finding whatever I need in the HTML code. And what I did next was I wanted to find exactly what separated, which tag in the HTML separated two different line items. So I just went back to Expedia, which is, let me just refresh the search. So what I did was, again, as I did earlier, I just highlighted this inspect element, and then I go to the one that highlights the entire row. And there it is. So it says div class equal to grid container, etc. So what I did is I copied this text over here, and I went back to Python. It's pasted over here in a comment actually. And what I did was I used a function in Beautiful Soup and did a find all to find all the different chunks of HTML code for each row. So like, for example, you have about 30 rows or something of data over here, and I wanted HTML codes for each one of those 30 rows approximately. So what I did is I followed the documentation procedure for Beautiful Soup and the find all function, and essentially you just write it a little differently. So you just, if the tag said div class equal to grid container, etc., you just write div first, comma, as the first input, and the second input is in curly brackets. You write the first one class, and then grid container, and then comma, data test ID, listing main. And then once you execute this, you should save this to a variable as well. So when you do this, you essentially have a variable that has all the different chunks of HTML data for each row. Now ideally this would have all the different 30 different rows of data, but for some reason it only returned 5. So I was like, I followed the whole documentation. I did exactly what I needed to do, but it was still only getting me 5, but I was seeing more than 30 rows. So what could have gone wrong? So the first thing that came to mind is that probably the website, the company, has probably added some fail-safe options, not fail-safe, some protection to protect itself against bots. And yeah, just to make sure its servers don't slow down if bots just swarm it with requests. And turns out that was true. So the one drawback with the thing I did over here using the URL open and URL lib2 is that it cannot execute JavaScript. So what I mean by that is the company Expedia, what they've done with their website is using HTML, they only execute 5 rows first, and then they use JavaScript to create new rows of data, and then that gets stored in an inner HTML somewhere. And that cannot be caught by this function over here, this library over here. It only gets the first 5 or whatever is the raw HTML that you get by going to the URL. So I had to figure out another way of getting the JavaScript HTML as well. So let me just comment this first, and I'll go over the alternative method. All right. So I use this library called Selenium, and there's this web driver that it had. And what this does essentially is it opens a new browser in Python that you can control using Python code. So whatever you tell Python to do in Python, it'll try to do that. So I'll go over it, how it looks. So over here, you're trying to initiate it by using the WebDriver and Chrome. So you could even use Firefox or whatever. And actually, you'd have to also install a specific file for this, an exe file. And it needs to be in the same directory that you're operating from. And I'll add a link in the description on how to do that, on how to download and what to download. So over here, I'm initiating the browser. So essentially what this will do, it'll open the new browser in Python. And then the next line, I'm just telling it to get a URL from that list of 90 URLs. I'm just telling it to get the first one. So let's try to do that. Have I done this? No. Yeah, I've done this. Okay. All right. So I'm going to run these 2 lines over here. Actually, I've already run them before. And what you're going to get is this browser over here. And it says that Chrome is being controlled by automated test software. So that's what opened up when you ran these 2 lines. And it essentially went to this URL that you had typed. It's the first URL in that matrix. Or actually, and then what you do is you wanted to use the execute script function, and you want this. What this does is it looks at all the different HTML, even using JavaScript and everything, and it stores all of that into a variable of your choice on Python. So that's this similar thing that we did earlier with the other approach, where we saved it to HTML after establishing a connection and then reading all the HTML data. It's essentially what we're doing here. And then we use the Beautiful Soup library, again, on the HTML data that we have, just to make parsing easier. And then we do the same thing as earlier. We find the node that we want to loop over, and we try to find all the list of different combinations of, or all the nodes, sorry. And I'll just quickly go over this right now. I'll execute these. All right, so it changed to Atlanta, New York. And now I'm going to get the inner HTML. And what this looks like is, it looks like all this HTML text like how we saw on the web page after doing the inspect element. But this has more data now because it's also getting the JavaScript data. And usually what I normally do, I just Control A, copy, and I paste all of this into a better text editor so it's easier to navigate. For now, I'm just using Notepad, which is not too bad. It's just to navigate for later. Next, what we do the beautiful soup. And then we do main and find. And now that we print the length, it's 36 different rows. Initially, when we used the previous one, it was only 5 because it did not get any of the JavaScript stuff. But now, using this method, we got everything, all the different rows. So it worked out. And this was just testing, by the way. And once I figured that it's working, it's realized I could get all the data that I needed. So what were all the variables that we were looking for in the headers? So there was departure airport, and we already have this information from this variable. Departure date, also we have this variable for dates. Departure time, we did not have, which is what is the first thing we should look for in the HTML code that we got. So to find, first I want to find what node would I even be able to find that at. So I go to this thing over here again, and so you see over here, you see 5:37 to 12:01. So the departure time is going to be the first one, the 5:37 p.m. So I'm just going to select this, inspect, and it's going to automatically take me to this node here, just span data test ID 5:37 p.m. So I copy the text in this node, and I'll just paste it in Python. Where is it? It is here. So that's the text that I found. When I did it earlier for another one. And this 5:35 a.m. was the departure time. And just as we used this part over here for finding the main rows, we do the same thing, but within those rows, we try to find the departure time, essentially. So we just write this a different way using the same find all function. Span goes here, data test goes here, departure time goes here. And also we're using main 0 because we only, for testing purposes, we just need one value or one chunk of HTML. So if you remember, main had 37 or 36 different chunks of HTML. So we just need one of them. So we're getting the first one here. So let's try that. And once you assign it to a variable, you can check its variable type, and it's a result set. So it's not really a string yet. So you can't really manipulate it as you want. So if let's see what it looks like. So if you see in the output data over here, it's in square brackets, and it's like the span, test ID, departure. It's exactly how you saw in the HTML, but we want the text data in the middle, the 5:35 a.m. That's what we want to extract. So we just do some basic string manipulation. We change it to a type string. And first we remove it from the square brackets as well by taking the first element of the square brackets. So if you just did temp 0, it would remove the square brackets. And then I convert it to a string by just using the str function, and I assign it to a variable. So now you see it has these apostrophes at the end, which says that it's a string. And now I can do string manipulation to just get everything before this and after this out of there. And now it looks like this. And I just use the split function, but there are many more ways to do this. So now that we know that we can get all this data, or at least the departure time data, just by doing this, we can kind of automate it to go through every single row and get all of the data. And before we do that, also tested out how to get the rest of the data. Like there was arrival airport was constant. It was New York, which was a constraint, and that was set by us. And arrival date was a calculated value, because if you look over here, yeah. So the arrival date is not really given anywhere. It's just the departure date that we had already fixed. The arrival date is kind of calculated, but it's not really visible and not present in the HTML. But the thing that is visible is this +1 right here, which shows that the arrival date is the next day from when you departed in the local time zone. And what we do basically is loop through all these different all the different rows and see that if this +1 exists, then you just convert the initial departure date into an integer from a string, add 1 to it, convert it back to a string, and then make that your arrival date. So it's just departure date +1. And if you don't find the +1, you just let the arrival date be the same as the departure date. That was the logic used for that variable. For arrival time, that was given. It's the same thing. You just try to find it like this. And yeah, you just get the same node, the arrival time, and then you just do the same things we did earlier. Duration is also given right here. Number of stops is also given. Airline name is given. And the price is also given. So everything else was just doing the same thing over and over again, trying to find all the variables. However, if you do this, it only gives you one row of data in the Excel sheet out of the 4,000. So you need to loop over every single combination. So to do that, I'll just quickly go over the loops that I created. The outer loop here is all the different URLs. So if you remember, we had 90 URLs, and the outer loop is just telling the browser, the Python browser, that hey, you need to go to this URL first, and then within that URL, look for all the different chunks of rows, and then gather all of that data, and then append it to the output. So at the end of this loop, the inner loop is just going through the length of main, which is all the number of rows for that URL, and making sure we get all the data for all the rows. So at the end, we're doing a loop, and we're just converting everything into a matrix. And in this case, it's a list actually. And Yeah, you're essentially getting all the data in the same order as you initialize the headers as. So the first value is going to be the departure airport, second's date, the last one's price. So that's how it's being set up over here. First one's the first value in the city date matrix that we had created earlier somewhere over here. Yep. So that's just the airports and dates. The second one's the date, and the third one's the departure time that we had just tried to find over here. Or sorry, the departure time. That was the departure time. Yeah. So that's the first value in the loop over here. We just made sure to change the main 0 to main j, because you wanted to loop through all the different values, not just 0. And yeah, the rest of it is just doing the same thing over and over again. And I've also added these sleep values here, which is just, I did not want the website to think that I'm a bot. I wanted to add some sort of human delay. So I did not want to crash the website either, although I'm sure I wouldn't be able to. But just to be safe, I added a little bit of delay in most of the steps. And yeah, then I just looped through all of it. So let's see how that looks. I also added a print I, comma j at the end, just so that in case my Wi-Fi went out or something crashed, I'd know exactly where it crashed, so I can continue from there. So it's just a failsafe. Thankfully, it did not happen. So let's try this out. So output is empty. And now I'm going to loop through this. So it's going to use the first URL, then go to this website, and now it got all the HTML, and it's working on looping through the HTML for getting all our values. And you see over here the print ij is in work over here. 0, 0 is when I equals 0 and j is 0, then 0, 1. So what this is doing is for URL number 0, the first one, it went through all the different chunks of data. Now it's working on the second URL, and it's going to continue doing so until it finishes or crashes. There we go. So now it's working on the second one. So I'm not going to go through the entire 90. I'm just going to stop this here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up the original output that I had generated. I had saved the initial output as a pickle file, or using the pickle function. It's a library that that allows you to save all of your output into files and then read it back. So I'll just open it back up, and here's what the output looked like. So this is essentially the Excel sheet, but in this form. So the first row has all the data like airport, date, time, price, etc. And it's there for each row. And there are probably 4,000 of these. And yeah, it says the size is 4018. And then we can't just leave it there. We would need to export it to an Excel or CSV. So what I did is I used the CSV library that you can use for writing it into a CSV. So there's a with open, and here you can just name it whatever you want. This is just the way to name your file. You can name it anything. And then the mode is W, which means you're trying to write the file. And here F is temporary, or it's the file handle that you're assigning to this. Then you assign a temporary variable and open the writer function from the CSV library. And then you're opening the file handle and using a delimiter as comma. because I want this to be a CSV file, which is comma separated values, and my matrix or my output matrix, it's separated by commas anyways. That's the way we set it up. So the first row, I want it to be the headers, all these essentially this part over here, headers. I want this to be my first row. So that's what was done here. And then I loop through all the different values on the rows in our output matrix. And yeah, we just write every single row, and then we close the file. And then this saves in whichever document directory you're working in. It saves it as whatever you named it as. And then, yeah, you just open it from your directory. It'll be a CSV file, but I just converted mine to an Excel because I wanted to add this formatting for bolding the headers, but it's essentially going to be all of this minus the bold headers. So yeah, that is how you convert all of that airline data into Excel or CSV. Now, thank you very much for watching. And I do tend to upload videos every now and then. So in case, if you found this helpful, consider subscribing. So in case I upload something interesting, and it'll probably catch your eye in the subscriptions page as soon as I upload. All right. Thank you very much for watching.